What up, guys? Welcome to the Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, episode 323. Today we have TJ from the We Defy Association. If you guys are familiar with them, with the work they do, or if you've ever seen me wear a We Defy rash guard or T-shirt in some of my YouTube videos and things like that, he is the vice president there currently. He's a volunteer, and they are a nonprofit organization that supports veterans through jiu-jitsu and what we do. And again, it's been really impactful to a lot of their members and to a lot of the people they work with. And we're going to have him on the podcast today to talk about him, his involvement in jiu-jitsu, which is always fun. And he was a fighter pilot, which for me, I'm kind of a geek when it comes to
That's cool.
aviation. Like I didn't want to take up the whole podcast there. I could probably and he probably doesn't want to talk about it that much either, but I could probably start asking him really technical questions that nobody else would understand, but that I'd be geeking out about. But nonetheless, we talk a little bit about that, and then we get into the actual podcast with him and talk about We Defy, what they do, jiu-jitsu, the whole thing, and lots of cool, interesting sort of perspectives, again, coming from a person who was a fighter pilot, which means, he's kind of the cream, the sort of the top of the rankings there as far as what he's doing, because it's a very competitive field to get into, and then getting into jiu-jitsu and some of the things he's learned both from both the disciplines, both the fighter pilot and also jiu-jitsu. And so hopefully you guys enjoy the podcast and get something from it. Also big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you've never tried CBD, or maybe if you've used different products before from different companies, check out Charlotte's Web. Random story for you. I just thought that was funny. Had a friend of mine came into town, and he was listening to the podcast one time. It's like, hey man, I was talking about these CBD gummies, and I like taking CBD at nighttime for sleep. I tend to think that it gives me a benefit from there. Now, it's not FDA regulated. You can't say certain things, but I take it, and anecdotally, I notice a difference. So, you can lead with that. I'm a big believer in, try it for yourself and see what you feel, because as we'll talk about on the podcast here with TJ, you could have all the anecdotal evidence and it's working for all these people, but unless you have someone that says, some scientist said that it's okay, maybe you can't get people to push it. Nonetheless, story goes like this: guy wanted to get some CBD gummies, and he went to one of these local smoke shops, and the guy was like, yeah man, we got some CBD gummies, but we got some really good stuff too that'll help you sleep even better. And he gave him this stuff called Delta 8, which, if any of you guys know, is basically he's taking edibles, right? Like he's having special brownies. Now, this guy does not tell him to prepare himself to take a certain dosage. Maybe you should ease into this. Nothing. What does he do? My friend goes back and he's ready to sleep, right? So he gobbles down one of these gummies, and it's rather tasty. So he's like, I'll have another one. Gobbles it down. And then, 30 minutes go by, gobbles down another one, right? So, he probably should have had a half or a quarter maybe to begin with, and he has way too much. And if any of you have ever partook in such activities before, then you'll know what happened. He was off of his rocker for a long time. He said he was staying at a hotel, and he went down to the hotel, and he was just he's basically mildly hallucinating. And then he's going down to the hotel area where they had some food, and he basically bought all the honey buns that they had that were packaged,
honey buns.
They're tasty. He ate 12 of them, and he's just sitting in his hotel room trying not to freak out, eating 12 honey buns. So again, I just share this with you guys. CBD is not that, and always be careful with what you do get out there, because again, there's a lot of people that they'll use the term CBD, and it's it has a bit of presence about it, right? And they'll say, oh, this is great, you take this, whatever, and then who knows whatever else they put into it on the supplements, or again, if they sandwich it with other stuff, sometimes you're getting a unexpected effect. So that said, Charlotte's Web has a lot of different products, everything from CBD products that are put together with other nutritional supplements to provide things like more of a calming effect, or to help with recovery, that sort of thing, or focus. Along with that, though, they even have other products like their CBN product, which is geared towards sleep. And again, I'm almost done with my test run on it. I'll let you know more about it later. But nonetheless, guys, if you want to try out CBD products for yourself, go to their website, charlottesweb.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. Again, CHEWJITSU30. Also, thanks to our buddy Matt at Epic Roll for supporting the podcast. If you guys are interested in getting some really good jiu-jitsu gear, apparel, whatever it is that you're looking for, check his website out at epicrollbjj.com. You can go on there. You can find t-shirts, rash guards, shorts, no-gi gear, gi gear, apparel, whatever you're looking for. Cool designs, good quality stuff, great customer service. And again, a lot of you have, it's funny, I go to seminars and I meet a lot of you. And when I meet a lot of you, many of you have on some Epic Roll stuff. And I always go around and ask, like, hey, how'd you hear about Epic Roll? Yeah, I heard it from you. And I went and bought his stuff and it was great. And Matt put a little note in, or they, one guy, I remember he told me that like they sent the wrong thing. And so Matt immediately sent the right thing to him and was like, keep it, give it to someone else, that kind of thing. So, he takes care of the customers as best he can. But nonetheless, if you guys want to get some stuff, save 20%, epicrollbjj.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu20, CHEWJITSU20. I spell it out for you because I've had a few people say I tried Jiu-Jitsu 20 and it didn't work. So it's Chewjitsu. Also, if you guys want to support the podcast and get access to the library of content we have from the podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, and you can become a patron of the podcast. So if you're listening every week and you'd like it to continue going and you'd like to support it, check it out at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. When you join up, you'll get access to an exclusive library of content that we give away to you, with lots of different stuff, everything from warm-up routines and recorded seminars, things of that nature, to just extra content that you can listen to if you're interested with our guests and with Eugene and I. And if you do have a question that you'd like to get answered or like to get touched on, then again, you put it in there and it will get preferential treatment because you are a Patreon member. And so again, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you want to get my daily email, then you can go to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up, you'll get access to my daily email, which goes into everything from jiu-jitsu tips specifically to technical stuff to exclusive offers and events that I have to philosophical books that I'm reading. Or just yesterday, I sent out a list of 8 different books that I really enjoyed over the last couple of years and sent those to people. And then everything else from dieting ideas to trainings, anything that I come across that I find useful, whether it's training related and an idea, something that I'm eating, whatever it might be, I always throw it in there and send that out to you guys. And so again, if you want to get that, you can go to chewjitsu.net/join. And so guys, with that said, let's jump into this podcast with TJ, talk about his jiu-jitsu training, his days as a fighter pilot, and then also the We Defy Association.
And how long ago did you serve in the military?
Let's see, I went to the Air Force Academy. So the day after I turned 18, I left home and went there and graduated in 99, and then was in the Air Force active duty 11 years and then 9 years in the reserves. And most of that was flying F-16s, then T-38s as an instructor pilot. And then the last couple of years, I just did a reserve Air Force gig where I helped high school kids that were applying to the Air Force Academy, like get their congressional nominations, and kind of mentor to them and kind of lead them through the whole process. Because getting into a service academy is an extremely complicated and lengthy application process. So they have jobs for some of us to just, that's what we did in the military. And that was the way I finished out the last couple of years, kind of pulled the throttle back a little bit and chilled.
So I'm kind of like that's like one of my sort of side, like we all have our interests, and we've got our little side interests. One of my side interests is like aviation, and then like fighter pilots and all that stuff. I find it fascinating, and have like a collection in my library of like biographies, memoirs, things like that. With the fighter pilot stuff, did you like get out of high school thinking like this is what I want to do, or how did you end up getting into that role? Because again, it's a tough gig to get into and it's very competitive. How did that happen?
I grew up in Cleveland and kind of the Rust Belt time period. So in the 90s, I think in the U.S. the economy was generally really solid, but in the Rust Belt it was not. That's where it started to crumble. So my junior high and high school years, I was in the public school system. I was just watching the funding dry up and losing opportunities and like pay to play sports because all the steel workers were losing their jobs in Cleveland. My dad was attached to that industry through banking and stuff. So but ever since I was a kid, the first movie I saw in the theater, and I still remember walking down the theater hallway, and there are these mirrors on the sides, and we were probably only there for 5 or 10 minutes before it started, but I felt like I was waiting 2 hours, and it
Mhm.
was Return of the Jedi, and
Mm,
that's the first movie that I remember seeing in the theater. I know I
okay.
saw Empire in the theater because I remember, and this is a spoiler for everybody who hasn't seen Empire Strikes Back, right? At this point,
Do we have
my
to give a
dad
spoiler for a
Servant.
40-year-old movie?
I know. My dad, for 3 days after we saw Empire together, said, "I can't believe it. I can't believe that Darth Vader is Luke's father." And
Oh, wow.
I remember him walking around the house saying that. And the other thing I remember, I know I saw it in the theater, but I don't remember the experience. I remember one other thing from it, and it was that at the end, the bad guys won in Empire. And I
Mm,
told my
yeah.
mom, like, "Mom, how can the credits rolling? Mom, how can this be
Mhm.
over? The
Yeah.
bad guys won." So that's where I think some of the most important lessons in life you can actually learn from Star Wars. Sometimes the bad guys actually do win. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's not fair. And I learned that at 5 years old, watching Star Wars, watching Empire. But as even a littler kid, the trench run on the first Death
Ah,
Star,
yeah, yeah.
that was what made me want. Uh, Part of what made me think that the idea of flying something like a fighter or an X-wing was just awesome. And so
Sure.
when I was a kid growing up, I never wanted to play. I never wanted to be Luke. I always wanted to be Wedge Antilles,
Okay.
the other pilot that was in all the movies.
Sure.
And then I got into a video game, and I must have been the beginning of high school, called Red Baron, and it was a World War I flight
Oh, yeah.
simulator. And I
Uh-huh.
played that and played that and played that. Um, and then I started getting into models and just building models. And I think it was about 10th grade. My mom sat me down and she said, "What do you think you want to do when you grow up?" Like, I have no idea. And she said, "What do you think about this airplane stuff?" Like, I don't know. Why do you ask? She goes, "Well, is that something you want to do?" And I said, how do you even do that? We don't know anybody that does that. Like, that's like being an NFL player. Like, who gets to do that?"
Mhm.
And then she told me about the Air Force Academy. I had no idea what it was, and she explained it and ROTC and all those things. And she would, "Your dad and I think your grades are good enough to go to college." And my parents did not graduate from college.
Mm.
They said, "We think you should go, and if that's something you want to do, we need to find a way to pay for it because there's no money for you to go to college.
Mhm.
But we think you should. So we think you should look at this." So I applied to West Point. I applied to the Air Force Academy. I did not apply Annapolis because I didn't want to be in a boat. Um, and then I got accepted to West Point right away, and Air Force eventually came later. And West Point offered me an early acceptance, but I said no. I have to wait for Air Force because what I really wanted to do was go fly fighters, and
Sure.
that's kind of there's the long story of how it started. But yeah, kind of ever since as I was a kid. But then I have to credit my mom with having the foresight to recognize, hey, this is something he might be interested in. He has some level of talent at some stuff at least.
Mhm.
So maybe if we nudge him here, and then it just set me off in a whole direction.
Yeah,
And
well,
if
I
it
think,
wasn't for that conversation, I wouldn't even be sitting here right now with jujitsu either.
it's cool that your mom that noticed that because I think sometimes maybe as if we're older than people or if we're parents or whatever, sometimes you can see the where it's someone that's younger is inspired by something and they may not even realize it, right? They may not even
Yeah.
realize that there's a path to this thing. And we've a lot of people that were older, unfortunately weren't able to follow the path that maybe they wanted to. So it's cool that she was able to, like, hey, we see that you're inspired by this thing, you obviously have some interest here, let's direct that and get you towards that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was. And they were very supportive of me in the application process too. They helped me through it. They did everything they could to support and learn about how it works because it's like I said, it's complicated. It takes a lot of steps. It's extremely competitive. My grades were good, but they weren't exceptional. I was probably slightly below average grade wise when I went in there. I graduated smack in the middle academically, so that was good. I mean, did fine. Um, but it was my extracurriculars. Like I think that was the other thing they noticed. So, like I was always trying to be in the front, leading or organizing. I had a lot of initiative. I was just kind of a self starter. I worked hard, and those were things that they saw and recognized. And then on a resume, both West Point and the Air Force Academy recognized as well, which is how I got in there, even though my grades were a little less than optimal. I mean, they were fine, they were decent, but I never got straight A's in my life ever, not even close.
Yeah, it just shows that's not really the people with the best grades aren't usually the best at, they may be good at scoring or testing or whatever, but they're usually maybe not be the best applicant or the best person to do the job.
Yeah, and that one thing they said, and I think West Point leans into this even heavier, was we want people that are well-rounded, that are adaptable, that are intelligent, obviously, but have skills that can be applied to a lot of different areas. I think actually Zuckerberg was just talking about this the other day. I saw a headline where they said if somebody is exceptionally good at something or they're really passionate about it, you look at the rest of what they do too and see, do they continuously apply themselves successfully in other areas? Like, can they take that skill that they're really good at and use it in different areas? So you don't always need somebody to be the most educated in a particular field to work well in that field. They need to be adaptable. They need to have skills that are transferable, and they need to be able to make adjustments.
Yeah. Well, we've all met people that were incredibly book smart who could ace a test, that can do whatever. But then, 2 seconds of talking with them and they're, completely detached from reality or have absolutely no common sense, which isn't maybe the best thing for most real world situations. So I wanted to ask you too, again, just more from a fan of this stuff kind of point. What did you what was like something that you found really enjoyable about being a fighter pilot? Again, it's a unique experience. I remember reading I think it was Robin Olds's biography, where he's talking about being older and stuff like that. I'm sure you know who he is, right? And so all the Air Force guys do. But listening, reading the book, and then he's talking about looking up at the mountain, and he's like, I just want to go over it one more time, and in a Phantom or whatever. But for you, what did you enjoy about being a fighter pilot, or maybe where there were some things that you found really enjoyable about the experience?
It's just this. I wanted the speed as a kid. I thought that was awesome. But what I really liked was the speed with the problem solving, because when you're flying tactically, it is nonstop problem solving. And I used to say I missed, when I left the F-16, I was a combat flight lead, and when I was leaving it to go into the instructor pilot world, I remember saying to my friends, I'm sad because I'm going to miss playing quarterback. I'm going to miss looking at the defense and calling the audible at the line and having a plan and then seeing how it all falls apart. And now we got to figure out on the fly with stress and with some level of finite resources and the time constraint. Okay, how do we complete the mission now? And I still love that environment today, where when we talk about it when we Defy too, with some of the projects we do, when we have ambassador summits, when we have galas, when we do different events, you plan it the best you can. Something always, I don't want to say it goes wrong, but there's always some curveball. And that's my favorite. I'm waiting for the curveball. I love it, because now it's problem solving. Now I'm thinking on the fly. And, Jiu-Jitsu ties right into that too. It's all, that's the stuff I like. It's this mind engagement that really, really drove me and excited me. And I didn't know that before I started flying that was going to be a thing, but that's the piece. That's why I was pretty good at the Air Force Academy too. It's because I was able to make adjustments on the fly. I was able to, I enjoyed that challenge. Okay, hit me and I'll come back at you and we'll see what happens next. And I'm going to keep driving until we figure this out. And that was awesome. It was cool. And to do it at 500 miles an hour was super cool.
Yeah, right. Well, and that's kind of interesting. It's something I was thinking about the other day, that, a lot of times, we develop some, core proficiency or competency somewhere in our life with a skill or thing, right? And then that you sort of learn lessons through that then spills over into everything else. And like you said, with your, being a fighter pilot, you're faced with these, fast-paced decisions that have to be made. You're problem solving in this really fast-paced situation. And, you plan as best you can, but you always sort of anticipate the curveball. So when they come, you're not really bothered by them, because you're like, well, you knew this was going to happen. So It's, basically the same thing. You almost take it that like, I don't know about you anyway, like with jiu-jitsu, I always kind of plan it. I have a game plan, but I know the game plan's never going to go off perfect, right? It's kind of like the idea that, what was the old adage was that, the battle plan never survives first contact with the enemy. Mike Tyson said it pretty well. It was like, everybody's got to play until they get punched. And so with jiu-jitsu, it's the same thing where, you make these plans no matter what you're doing. And sometimes it's with the business where I'm like, okay, I had this plan of doing this. It didn't work. But it's just like when I'm rolling in the gym. It's like or I'm in a competition. Of course it didn't work. I got to figure it out. Right. So I think sometimes we have those little areas that we develop and it spills over into other aspects.
Yeah. And even with Defy, it's the same thing, because when I got involved with it was when they were first starting to add volunteers, and there were 17 of us that they brought on. So there were 5 board members, and then I think maybe like 2 contractors at the time, just running it. It was when the footprint was blowing up from just North Texas to all over the country. And so Alan Chabaro, who founded it, said, we need more help. Like this thing is growing faster than we can administer it. And that's great. But to do it, we need to identify people that want to volunteer for us. So I was one of the first ones. And I ended up just taking on more and more responsibility, because with my career, I have a lot of free time too, to use how I see fit, which is really cool about the airline career. So as we grew and started to identify new problems and new opportunities, I was basically eventually in a position where I got to use creativity to figure out how to take the limited assets we have and keep building an operational model that was expanding and pulling in more people that we were sponsoring, but also pulling in more and more volunteers. And now we're sitting at like about 350, 360 volunteers. We have a staff of like 30 to 40 that I really rely on. And I made an organizational structure just like what I would have seen in the military. That's some of it's supervisory, and then some of it's based on specific functions. And it's just taking stuff I learned from the military and in squadrons and doing different jobs and being, an assistant director of operations in squadrons and things like that, and applying it to this completely different model that's very grassroots oriented, that does not have a lot of resources like the military does, and is growing and growing and growing all the time, that now has a worldwide footprint, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, where we started and where it is. But it's the one thing that I was in the right place at the right time, but then we have so many volunteers and people that are passionate about the project. I mean, I should say, like, thank you as well, because, you're out here wearing the t-shirt, you're wearing our rash guards, you've had seminars for us. You've been a staple of support for us, over as long, even before I was involved with it, and Tony Clemente, one of your black belts, who just moved, he was one of our earlier volunteers also. But even before we had that volunteer team, he was always supporting, and he was involved unofficially with Defy way before I even knew what it was. So I want to say thank you too for highlighting us and for bringing me on the podcast and giving me a chance to kind of talk about how all these things work together in a fun way.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a cool mission, right? I mean, and that's really what it comes down to. I think that it's a cool mission. It's cool what you guys do, and we'll dive more into it in the podcast, because again, it's a really cool thing that you're doing. And I remember when Tony was at the gym, and he would give me a rash guard. And to be honest, I first started wearing the rash guards just because they looked cool and they were comfortable, right? I was like, there was a good looking rash guard. I was like, okay, it's nice. And then I started and Tony started to explain more about what the company was doing and what the organization was doing. And you're like, well, that's a cool mission. I like that. So it's kind of easy to get behind, right there. It's not really a big deal. It's like, of course, you're going to support it, right? So yeah, appreciate what you guys do.
The first time I saw you wearing one, that was when we were a lot smaller than we are now too. And every single time someone with a platform wore some of our stuff, we got followers. People would find out about us. They'd look us up. What is that? And it was so exciting when I saw you, one of your instructions with that. I think it was the Patriot one was the first one. The multicolored shield emblem was the first one I saw you in. And
okay.
I mean, our volunteers get so excited when anybody with a platform like this represents us. It means so much to the people that are doing the volunteer work. And the athletes themselves, they're still new to jiu-jitsu, so they're kind of finding their way. So a lot of them maybe don't have the same situational awareness as the volunteers do, but our volunteers are everything from like white belts all the way up to black belts, and even some people that don't do jiu-jitsu. But it just means a tremendous amount when we see people out there helping us tell our story. And you've been doing that for a long, long time for us, which is fantastic.
So I want to, TJ, I want to backtrack just a little bit, just kind of to connect the dots. And you talked about jiu-jitsu, and like I want to talk about your connection to jiu-jitsu, how it kind of came into your life, and then if you can kind of share how that transitioned to working with We Defy, and then your role with We Defy, and we kind of can discuss the mission as well about what you guys try to do with that foundation. So like jiu-jitsu for you, when did you find it, and kind of were you even looking for it when it came into your life?
Well, so I've always kind of been interested in combatives. When I was a kid, I wrestled in junior high casually, like just, during the season. So it wasn't like I had a big wrestling background or anything like that, but just a little bit of that. And I really thought, I was always interested in like kids karate and all these things, but we couldn't afford to do it, so I never got to do it. And then my senior year in high school, it was more expensive to play high school sports than to join a Kali program. So I did about a year of Kali on my own, which is Filipino martial arts. And then when I went to the Air Force Academy, I did like 6 weeks of judo, and I really liked it. But I had to decide between judo and flying as an extracurricular because I was not smart. I was not smart enough to do both and keep my grades where they needed to be, because I had to keep my grades up enough to get a pilot slot too. So I chose flying because that was the career. And then I had like a 15-year layoff where I didn't do anything with martial arts, but I was always really intrigued by it. And one of the goals I actually set for myself when I was in high school is I want to fly fighters, I want to be in a band, and I want to be a black belt in the martial art. I got the first two by the time I was 25, and I'm still working on the third one. So,
Okay.
but I'm getting closer. So I
What kind of music?
left
What kind of
active
band are
duty.
you in?
Oh, years ago, we used to like when you're on a military base, you have a captive audience. So when they
Okay.
have parties, they want to have entertainment. So I used to just sing, and we do covers and mostly like, grunge rock and 90s
Okay.
alternative and stuff like that. So
Cool.
I played a little guitar, but it wasn't good enough to play. I was a better singer than a guitarist. So
Yeah.
I always
Well, a
ended
lot
up
of the
just
old
singing.
grunge rock, all you needed was a couple chords anyway, right? Like you could just get it
Yeah,
going.
yeah. We were never the good, but we were good enough for a bunch of pilots to hang out in a bar and watch while they were drinking. So it was
By
a
the way,
lot of
it's some of my
fun.
favorite music. All right.
Oh,
Like,
no, I'm not
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not
it's the place that I
criticizing.
grew
I'm just
up.
saying like, the music's very simplistic, right? Like a lot of those guys that like would be the guitarists and stuff,
Sure.
even like the guy from like Limp Bizkit, right? Like he's like, I mean, you can listen to the guy play and do some stuff and do amazing things with like the guitar, but then obviously if you're playing rock music, it's just like you just needed to like, you just needed to do what it's doing.
I'm not a skilled guitarist by any means, but I can play a little Nirvana. So, if that says something. I'm
Yeah,
pretty
that's what I
terrible at
mean.
guitar.
Well, the first time we did it, we were in Korea. We didn't have a drummer, so we just started acoustic, and we just had two
Yeah.
acoustic guitars and me, and then we added a tambourine, and then we had another singer, and then we by the end of it, we were able to do like 3-part harmonies and two guitars, and we put a bass player in there. So we were in Korea, we were bored, we had weekends to ourselves, and creative people that that like music find ways to get a band going. So just cover bands, fun stuff.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
So like I said, by the time I was 25, got that. When I left active duty in 2010 and got picked up by the Air Force Reserves, I also got hired to fly as an airline pilot. And I started to have a lot of free time on my hands. The schedule was pretty flexible. And I started to struggle with something a lot of people struggle with after the military, and it's that kind of a loss of sense of purpose. So I was still working in the reserves as an instructor pilot a couple days a month, and then I was doing the airline job, but I just didn't feel like that same passion for Passion may not be the right word. It was just that sense of purpose that this is what I do and I know why I do it. And when we leave the military, a lot of us put that part behind us and we have to find a new thing or a new
Mhm.
way to have a sense of purpose. And that's a huge struggle for a lot of people. And I struggled with it some. And then I started thinking, well, I'd like to volunteer. Maybe I love dogs. Maybe I should go to like Pound and volunteer there or something. So I started looking at like different animal nonprofits and things like that. And the gym that we ended up when we moved to Minnesota, because that was where we were going to live for jobs and stuff. There was a Lifetime Fitness that had a little MMA room in it, and I thought, well, that looks fun. I've always wanted to get really get into that. So I started out and just did like conditioning classes, like pad work, heavy bags, things like that, and a little bit of grappling, but nothing substantial. And I did that for a while, and I really liked it. And then I wanted to maybe get more serious about it. I thought about sparring, but the injury risk with that, especially with the concussions and things like that, I just decided, nah, that's probably not the best route to
Probably not
go.
the best
And then,
idea for a pilot, right?
right, like I don't need to accept that level of physical risk. So even though I really wanted to, the coach is like, "Why don't you just do the jujitsu stuff? Like, you could just join the jujitsu club here." And I'm like,
Mm,
I don't. That looks terrible. It looks hot, and I remembered wrestling as a kid and how tiring it was and how
yeah,
exhausted I
yeah.
was. Like, I really like hitting stuff. That's more fun. I feel like I look cool when I hit stuff. Maybe
Okay.
I should But eventually they talked me into it, and then I completely got addicted to it, completely hooked.
Mm,
And that was actually so the first class I actually took was in 2015.
okay.
So almost exactly 9 years ago from this summer. And so I had a couple years there where I was just going to the gym, doing the occasional MMA conditioning stuff for fun. But then I dove into jujitsu, and I was like, yeah, this is it. This is something that I was missing. Like I have goals again. I have things I want to do. I have a progression that I want to make, and that really helped to fill that space of that sense of purpose piece. Um,
Do you going to that real quick, with the purpose piece, I'm always curious about this because, we get a lot of military guys in the gym,
mhm,
and talking to them. And, I've listened to some of them talk, and there's like, there's like this drive of like having something to sort of throw your energy into, right? That some people I
mhm,
think are just wired a certain way and they need something to be like all in on. For
mhm,
you, I would be curious to hear what your thought is. But one of the things that I've heard people talk about over and over again is coming out of the military is you lose that, not just a sense of purpose, but a sense of like sort of a community, right? Where like,
mhm,
a lot of times, because again, you can be in a corporate, business and be a worker and everything else, but it's kind of hard to like, hey guys, let's go get more market share or something. It's just
yeah,
it's really hard to get behind it. But you get a bunch of men and women together beating the crap out of each other, and it sort of cuts through a lot of bullshit that normally is in society, and it kind of bonds us together in a really like interesting way. And obviously it's not nearly as I wouldn't imagine as powerful as say something like going through combat. That's a completely different thing. But like reading, like talking to all the military guys, reading books like Tribes by Sebastian Juncker, like when he talks about the experience, you're like, there's a thread there where you're connected to this other group of human beings, and you're connected for this one shared purpose, rather than like, hey, we're here because of whatever sort of situation we like to claim or whatever. But it kind of cuts through all those barriers. For you, what do you feel like when you got into jiu-jitsu? What kind of void did it fill for you? Was it just the purpose thing? Was it the group thing? Or was it a mixture of things?
I think at first it was I I've always kind of identified myself as an underdog,
Hmm.
and I really liked the idea of learning this skill that would give me a superpower. And I started to, as soon as I started to feel that that was a thing, that was extremely validating based on the work I had done and then seeing results and empowering at the same time. Um, so that's kind of the initial piece that pulled me in. But then I think with the camaraderie piece, and what, you said something in there that you don't want to make the assumption, like inappropriately, that the camaraderie is the same or as important to people in jiu-jitsu as would be in combat or between soldiers. And I would say that there are absolutely people in our program that would tell you, not everybody would say this, but would tell you they're feeling the same camaraderie that they had in the military. And we're
Well,
all
I just want to be, I
individuals,
want to
we
be
all
careful with
experience
that idea because I don't want to
sure. Yeah.
I'm a civilian, right? So I haven't
Right.
experienced it. And so I always want to make sure I tread lightly with that idea.
Yeah, no, it's a very respectful way that you said it. Absolutely. But I can tell you from surveys and from some other things that there are people who are feeling the same level of camaraderie that they had in the military, and it was a piece that brought them back to life when they were struggling, maybe with substance abuse or suicide attempts, things like that. It's that community piece in jiu-jitsu is extremely strong and extremely important. And I have a whole slew of things that I talk about why jiu-jitsu works really well for veterans that are transitioning or veterans that are struggling. But the community piece, I think two things about jiu-jitsu that make the community piece work is, one, the struggle, because it's a shared struggle. We're struggling with each other and against each other. We're making each other better, and you can't do this alone. You have to have that partner and that team, and we share each other's successes. We get excited, and even though we might have a little bit of competitiveness within the gym, we really, really want to see each other succeed. And when I was a fighter pilot, you were very concerned about your own success. I mean, the old Top Gun's a little cheesy. I thought Top Gun 2 actually was a much more realistic vision of what people are like attitude-wise. It's still over the top a little bit. It's a great movie.
Sure.
It was a lot of fun to see. And they exaggerate some of the culture a little bit, but that is a piece of the culture. It's extremely competitive, and you want to win, and you're not. I can tell you in jiu-jitsu, I'm more excited when my friends do great than I was when I was a fighter pilot, because it usually meant I was lower on the totem pole then. And we were all judged against each other all the time, always put up against each other all the time. And even though you work well together, you build bonds. I think jiu-jitsu can be a healthier environment in terms of the competitive aspect than that particular microcosm or subculture of the military. It's just the way it was. The second piece that makes jiu-jitsu special is human touch. And you can see this in some of the other therapies that veterans do, like equine therapy. There's touch with the horse. We bond with other creatures through touch, and there's hormones and endorphins that are released. Like when I touch my son's face, he's 11. I hold his hand. I'm going to hold my son's hand until he's 40 when we're walking through the mall. Except he's going to stop in maybe a year or two from now, and it's going to break my heart because I'm a dad and I want to hold his hand, and he's going to look for some independence. And then in jiu-jitsu, that touch is always there. You can't have jiu-jitsu without human touch. And I think that is a often overlooked piece that bonds people in the gym together. And I don't know that many other activities that have that component. And there's a lot of things you can do, like CrossFit. There's a lot of great sports you can get into. You can go fishing, you can go hiking, you can rock climb. There's all kinds of ways to feed adrenaline, but you can't engage in human touch in a manner that's safe and healthy in Western society very often.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting. It's interesting you said that you said the touch. I didn't really think about that, but one of the things I have noticed is that I'm way more like touchy sometimes than like if I'm around non-jiu-jitsu people, because I'm just like, I'm gonna come up and hug you and whatever else. And I remember I was at a CrossFit like certification thing. We used to have a CrossFit affiliate at our gym years ago. And I remember, as a jiu-jitsu coach, like you're hands-on, you're grabbing people, I'm hugging, everything else. And I remember that one of the coaches was basically, he took me to the side and said, "Hey man, you can't touch people so much." And I'm like, well, why not? Like, I don't like, why is this a problem?
Yeah.
You know, because one, as a coach, I can give better cues sometimes physically
Yes.
when I touch them and move them around instead of me telling them. But then also too, just, you know, if I see someone, I hug them, grab them and what's up, man? Good to see you. And I haven't really thought about that, but yeah, sometimes that, it can be a little bit like off-putting for people who are not used to it, because most people in Western society have this little bubble around them at all times. And then if you have someone who is whatever, they come right through that bubble. It's it jars them a little bit.
Sure. So now we normalize it with this activity, and then we get the because there is absolutely a physiological benefit. We know that from science. There is a physiological benefit to human touch, or you're petting your dog. And we get that in jiu-jitsu in a really cool way. And so it just adds to this, the power of the sport and the power of the activity in terms of enhancing community.
Yeah, it's I never thought, like you said, I never thought of that as a thing. But we almost like you don't know somebody and you literally break that bubble, that barrier
It's real quick.
instantly. I mean, like, hey, what's up? Bump, slap, whatever, and you're going. And I think I'm the same way. Like I'm a physical therapist, so like I'm like, oh, where's it hurt? And I start poking and touching people. And sometimes I'm like, wait, are they? You know, I don't even. Obviously, when somebody comes to see you for treatment like that, they kind of give you you still have to get consent and all that. But like, it's just I get it. And there's like sometimes from like people that deal with chronic pain, right? Like they'll go to the doctor, deal with chronic pain. And like the doctor will never touch them or put their hands on them. And they're like, when they come to therapy, we touch them and they feel better just even from like that interaction. So I think like that's something I see in what I do. And so I think it's just such a powerful thing. That's cool.
Yeah, no, I think it's key. And I think it's why jiu-jitsu is one of the reasons why it's so well, not just veterans, people that have experienced trauma, as long as what they're experiencing in jiu-jitsu does not overwhelm them, because that can be negative when you're talking about therapy and recovery. Like you want to give people challenges that maybe push them a little bit, but don't shut them down. It's such a great activity for people to find that community, work through certain traumas. I mean, think about like sexual assault and those sorts of, because we have veterans that have experienced that come into the program. I would say that they have to be ready to confront that piece of it, that human touch and the lowering of their boundaries and everything. But that is a step-by-step process in learning to cope and learning to work through trauma, you know, in one very specific aspect. And I'm not a therapist. I have a psychology background, but I'm certainly nothing past undergraduate level. But there's a lot of work out there now that's been done on this too, that talk about how to bring jiu-jitsu into a therapeutic environment.
Well, that's I was interviewed for a book that's titled like Transforming Trauma Through Jiu-Jitsu, something like that. And I was interviewed for a book. Okay, you got it. So, you know, what was so interesting about that is, you know, that woman interviewed me. We probably talked for an hour and a half or something. And there's a little bit in the book. It's not too much. But, you know, she was talking to me and it very quickly became almost like a therapy session for me because, you know, I was telling her about one, that I'd had, sexual trauma as a kid. I had been jumped and had the crap beat out of me when I was 12 by like 17, 18-year-olds, and, it left me with a situation, like, for instance, I didn't know this was a thing, but hypervigilance. So like when I walk into rooms, I'm constantly like, my head's on a swivel at all times. I always know where I'm at. I always like, if we're in a place, I will see you before you see me. Because I'm just always on guard like that, whatever. But she was like, oh yeah, that's a sign of trauma, whatever. So I'm telling her all these things and she's like, oh, that's another sign of trauma. And then I'm going back thinking about some of the experiences I had early on in wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And you're like, oh, like that's why my body was wigging out so much, because you're processing through this. And then a lot of times now, like if I have like, younger people in the gym, sometimes if I see them reacting a certain way, I might ask like, hey, like, come over, let's talk real quick. Have you ever been through some stuff, and letting them know like, hey, you can basically back off at any point like this, you're in control. So if it's too much, you can always stop, chill out, come back. You don't have to, it's not a big deal. It's not like we're going to look at you differently if you have to like take a moment for yourself to regroup and then come back in as you sort of tackle the demons that are there. But it's super important. And I think that, at least for me, I came from wrestling loved wrestling, loved the camaraderie, loved everything about it. And when I got out of wrestling, I felt sort of like empty, like I need something, like I need whatever that is. And then I got into jiu-jitsu, then that was it for me. You know, and I was hooked forever. Going back to you with the We to Fight Association, how did your involvement with them? So you're doing jiu-jitsu, you're training since 2015, you're doing that whole thing. How did your involvement then shift to where you became involved with that organization?
So I was in a gym in Chicago on just a layover for work, and sometimes I pack a gi in my bag. This is 2017, so I haven't been doing jujitsu that long, but 2 or 3 years. And I ended up talking to this guy who had just come back from Iraq for like an hour and a half after class in the locker room, and I already had interest in trauma and therapy and PTSD recovery, just from a kind of an academic and a layman's interest level. I had, like I said, studied psychology in college, loved it. If I hadn't been a pilot, I would have wanted to do something in the field. And I've stayed current with a lot of stuff on a hobbyist level. So we were talking about his experience, what he was dealing with at home and with his family and combat. And I talked about some of the things that I had learned about recovery and therapy and treatment and things. And he said, what this talk that you just had with me is, I think, more effective than even most of the therapists that I've tried to see, where I just have not been able to connect with them. I think maybe you should pursue this, and you should get involved with the VA or do something. And that conversation was another conversation that set me off on a path. I said, okay, this is what I want to be involved in. So just like a couple weeks later, literally up in Minnesota, one of the gyms had a event. It was a super fight event. I had never been to one before. It was before Fight to Win had been up here. I was, like I said, just still kind of getting into understanding all the things about jiu-jitsu in the community and all the events. And it was being thrown as a fundraiser for Mission 22 and We Defy. And I thought, oh, this is, when I started to hear about what they do, I mean, this is exactly what I want to be involved in. So I looked at Mission 22 and I got their card, and they did a lot of different things. A little bit of it was jujitsu at the time. So I was like, well, that's cool. But then when I saw what We Defy did, that was it. That's what I want to be involved in. That's what I want to do. That I want to get veterans that are struggling with their disabilities from service into jujitsu as a therapy. I can do that. So then I talked to the board members were there. They were the ones who were fighting in the tournament, who were competing. And they were really busy, and there wasn't a lot of time to talk because it was a whirlwind for them. But I figured out where the gym was that the headquarters was in Texas. So a couple weeks later, just by chance, my best friend lived in Dallas. So we stayed with them for a couple days, just out of the blue. But my whole goal was to go to that gym. I was going to walk in there and say, I'm not leaving until you let me get involved somehow. And when I talked to the office manager there, who's still with the foundation, and she said, well, we're just starting a volunteer team, so you should email this black belt named Gina Franson. I said, Gina Franson from Minnesota? And she was a board member, and she was the first black belt in Minnesota. And I just knew about her. I had never met her, but I just knew who she was because I was in the Minnesota Jiu-Jitsu scene. And she goes, yeah, do you know her? I'm like, well, no. And they told her the story, how I was from Minnesota. And then that's how it started. And I was just one of the first 17 people. And that was in the fall of 2018. And I just kept taking on more and more responsibility because I had the time available. And that's the big broad strokes about how I got to where I am now.
So what is your position now with We Defy? What do you do? Kind of what is your job or description, and kind of what are you in charge of?
I'm a volunteer. I should say that first and foremost. There's about 400, 350, 360 people right now. The volunteer list goes up and down because people come in, people go out. But over 99% of the people involved are volunteers. There's a few contractors that we pay for certain professional services. I'm the vice president and the director of operations. So all of the scholarships that we apply, the way that they're run, the way selections are made, all the gyms that we partner with, the agreements that they sign, and the procedures that they abide by with us, all the volunteers, the volunteer policies, the recruiting, the retention, training. I run all of it, or I should say I'm the head of all of it. And then below me are staff positions of other volunteers that we've developed over time. And in the beginning, I was doing all of it, but I was only doing this much stuff because that's all I could handle, you know. But then we'd
Mm.
bring in more volunteers, train them, delegate stuff, and now what we do is, you know, much wider. And that's one of the coolest things is you get a part of the program maybe 80% of the way done. You think, I think this can run on its own. You delegate it out, and then that person takes it and just blows it up and
Mm.
makes it do stuff you never thought was going to be possible. And COVID's a great example because when that happened, we knew we had to somehow track the athletes and the gyms because gyms were opening and closing and we're paying them. And how do we make sure we don't overpay them? We want to make sure these guys get the full year of training because that's how much we pay for. So I said, why don't we have a couple of us, we'll have a couple of volunteers monitor the scholarships specifically. We'll call them mentors and they'll call the athletes and text them to see how things are going. And it was meant to be an administrative function, just to keep track of stuff. But what we found out is the mentors and the athletes were building peer-to-peer support relationships just organically.
Mm.
And like, wow, no, we need this part of the program, but I mean, we want to keep track of what's going on. That's important, but we need it because it enhances the support we're providing. They're building friendships and relationships and they're helping each other through. And you got a blue belt who's maybe talking to a white belt that's in the first couple of weeks and is really struggling. Not every relationship grows that way.
Yeah.
But that's one of the cool things about like playing quarterback or, you know, you're audible. There's a guy open downfield. I didn't know he was going to be there, but he just showed up open. I got to get the ball to him. You know? That's what's cool about helping this thing grow. And then empowering the other people at different levels in the organization to run with these programs and make it their own program and not just something that I came up with.
That's cool. And then for anybody listening who's not familiar with your organization, you know, what exactly does We Defy do?
We sponsor disabled combat veterans to train jiu-jitsu for a year as a therapy for their service-connected disabilities. And there's some other criteria. You have to have a VA disability rating of at least 80%. You have to have a DD 214 with an honorable discharge on it. And you have to be new to jiu-jitsu or a white belt. And then on our website, those are the major ones. There's some other little criteria and things like that that are explained. And the way we do it is we open our application once a quarter. So the next opening will be 1st of September. And it's not open for a real long time. It's only open long enough to get enough applications to fill the slots we expect to fund for the next quarter. So October, November, December. So we'll open it. When we get enough applications, we then close it because we want to get people that need help on the mats in as short a time as possible. And we think like 90 days is reasonable. We start to get to 120, we're okay with that. But if it's over 120 days, you know, and we're not helping anybody if they're just sitting on a waiting list. So
Sure.
We've kind of over time decided, well, let's not have a waiting list because the demand for the program far exceeds our funding. There's so many people that want to be taking advantage of the scholarship, and we service as many as we possibly can. But, you know, we're a nonprofit. We can only do as much as we have the funding for. And the last few years, it's pretty cool. I mean, we're flirting with $1 million of revenue every year now. We're getting close to that. And we sponsored over 1,300 veterans. I think it's 1,366 as of 1 July. It's been really successful on the one hand. The downside is there's no way we can service. I mean, I looked it up once, and I think just at the 100% level, I shouldn't throw these numbers out because they're going to be wrong, but there are hundreds of thousands of veterans that would technically qualify for this program. Hundreds of thousands. And obviously that's a lot.
Yeah.
But we service who we can, and we know unfortunately we can't help everyone that we would like to help, but we do the best we can with the resources we have to get them on the mats.
It would be so interesting to see, like, you know, a lot of times, like I've just listened to so many interviews on different podcasts or even talked to students who've come in, you know, and you come across these guys who were in the military that came out, you know, different issues, right? You know, but they would go through the doctors and stuff like that, and a lot of times they were prescribed things like different medications and stuff like that, and the medications really didn't do it for them. I've talked to so many guys where like they're taking, and there's nothing wrong with medications if they're necessary, but for a lot of guys I've seen where like I've had several friends who like got medication not working, they don't, it's not making anything better. They start training, and then it's like, oh, hey, like I either need less of this or I don't even need this at all. Like I'm not having the same issues with anxiety and stuff that I was. Or a friend of mine, and another thing, he was like, got started with training, but then he also had his hormones checked, and he's like, oh, your hormones are completely out of whack. And then he addressed those and then didn't need all the other stuff, and so it would be interesting to see like if the shift of like, if there was a way to provide those services to people to see what kind of impact it would have. Because I don't know, but it just seems like it would be a good thing, giving people who came out of that extreme situation purpose, connected, like you said, to touch, community, the camaraderie, the whole thing.
Well, one of the things that we need for grants is we need studies to be done on the program, and to do that, we also need funding for the usually, like to have a university come in and do a true peer-reviewed, with control groups, everything, study that is publishable. But we did a little bit of one on our own with some help, just to get some initial data, and then Kata DeWitt, who
one of our
is
black belts.
She actually, tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to submit to the new starting athletes a survey, or I guess, a study that she has put together for her dissertation.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. We're really excited to see that, or see what data we can pull from that. Obviously it's her data, but she's going to share it with us, and to have someone as interested in what we're trying to do as we are is really important to us, especially from a investigatory level. Like, what's actually happening? Can we demonstrate statistically that there's an impact? What is the impact? And if you can start to identify that, on the one hand, it teaches you, well, what else do we want to look at, and how much further can we take this? And then the other hand, it demonstrates efficacy that people who write grants can use to go after big grants, because that's been a challenge for us, is getting grants over to the $10,000 to $20,000 amount. We did get a big one from the VA a few years ago for like almost 200,000, but that's just one. The others that are in the $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 range that we'd like to have access to, we really have to demonstrate efficacy, and studies are going to be the way that's going to have to be done. So I really appreciate the Kata that she is taking a look at this for us, and hoping to be able to do more of that in the future too.
Yeah, she's excited about it. She if I don't know how much you guys talked, but Kate is generally very stoic as far as her demeanor, and then so like very stoic. And then when I saw her at the gym the other day, and she's like, "Hey, you're talking to TJ, on the podcast," and I was like, "Yeah," and then she lit up. Because she, I was like, because she's like, "Oh, we're doing this study or whatever." And she started explaining. I was like, "Oh, cool." So, I know she's very excited about it. And it's something that she's been. I remember talking to her probably sometime last year about, she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do her work with, and so I know she's very excited about it.
Yeah, no, we are too, and we'll support. We're going to support our research the best we can, because we want to see what happens. We believe there's an effect, if anecdotally, I know it's there because we've done surveys before, and the feedback we get from the participants is overwhelmingly positive, in so many ways when they write out what they're experiencing. The hard part is, how do you find the right test? Because there's a whole bunch of different kinds of tests. How do you find the right one that demonstrates the actual effects of the program? And so, if you really want to get nerdy about it, to really do it right, if you want to do it from, let's say, self-efficacy, which is a very particular component of psychology, or a component of the way we think about ourselves and our competencies. If you have high self-efficacy, it's a very good demonstrator of the potential to succeed. and maybe to succeed in other areas too, transferable, high efficacy. But to investigate that, you can't really take a generic test. You have to create a specific test that asks questions about the exact things you think you're seeing self-efficacy in. So
Mm.
particular domains, very specific proficiencies. So you can't just do a blanket general self-efficacy. It just doesn't work. So then it becomes an iterative process where you're trying, okay, well, we asked these questions, we didn't see the effects, but we saw effects on this thing. So maybe this is the piece we have to try to ask about. And that's just one way of doing it. There's also, like, if you're looking for symptomology improvement, like with PTSD, anxiety, depression, there's a whole other kinds of tests. It just depends on what you want to look at.
Yeah.
But my old professor was helping us with some other things too. And he said, it's an iterative process where you're going to do it over and over. So I have failed so many times before I found the right combination of things to look at. So we just think, oh, here's what's actually happening. We thought it was A, it's actually B, and we were completely wrong. But we had to be wrong a bunch until we figured out the right answer.
What's a story that you can share? You don't have to be specific with, like, what's a story maybe that you've gotten through Redefy or working through one of the people that you've been able to help that's been kind of impactful on you that you could share?
I would say almost from our own staff, because I mean, it's one thing to help the veterans, like they're my brothers and sisters in arms, right? But some of the people on the staff, of the volunteer staff, that they got into jiu-jitsu, they saw what it did for them, and then they started to help other people. The way that it's enhanced their life and given them that additional sense of purpose, where they went from, okay, I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner, it's providing that sense of purpose, I really like it, it's helping me. Guys are getting off drugs, from prescription drugs, even, where I don't need this anymore because of what
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu is doing for me. But then, like, some of these mentors and some of the stories they're telling me about their own histories and their suicide attempts and the things that they experienced in combat, and how being involved with the organization has been a life changer. So not just doing the jiu-jitsu, but then the opportunity to have learned about it and then provide it to other people. I mean, that's what's driving me too, is the ability to take this thing that I think is amazing and provide it to others. And that's, to me, it's extremely powerful. And I think that's why we have so many volunteers. And that's why this thing that said a budget of approaching $1 million a year, and it's all run almost exclusively by volunteers, by hundreds of volunteers. And that's pretty amazing. And we've talked to other people in the nonprofit space and in the business space. And one of the things they tell Travis Larson, the president, a lot, or they ask him, is, how are you doing what you're doing with volunteers? That seems, I don't know how you could possibly do that. And I think it's because a lot of us are ex-military. A lot of us found jiu-jitsu. We know what it did for us, and we want to give back to the other people who haven't found it yet.
Well, it's like the natural. I feel like, again, people think what they will, but reading through like some of like Joseph Campbell's work, where he would talk about the hero's journey kind of idea, and basically his whole idea was that it's all big metaphor, and the whole idea is that you go out and you do something and you find whatever that is, and then you come back and you share it with the other people. And I feel like it's just as you would say, basically, it's just how humans are kind of wired. I mean, you feel like most of us, if you find something that was really impactful and really helpful to you, what do you want to do but share it with other people and help them out?
Yeah.
Obviously sometimes that can border on, zealotry and be a little bit off-putting, right? Like you get the guy who just found CrossFit and he's like, man, you need to go do a WOD with me. You're like, all right, back off. But, like a lot of us, as far as jiu-jitsu, we go through and we find this thing and it's so impactful to us, and for you guys especially, obviously it's impactful to you, and you see what it does for other people, what it did for you, and then there's that beautiful sort of opportunity to then say, hey, like, you were just like me, why don't you come over here with us and see if it does the same thing for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's what so many of us experience, and I think that's why I've been doing this for years as a volunteer. I'm still doing it. I can't imagine ever wanting to stop. Now, at some point, this thing will get way bigger than I can handle, hopefully. And it's going to be time for me to step aside and somebody with a different skill set to step into this role and take it to where it needs to go.
Mhm.
That's just a natural progression. And I need to make sure, and the people involved with this, we all need to be aware of that if this thing goes well, someday, like it's almost the greatest compliment that you can get is you did so great that there's a new skill set needed to do this.
Mm.
You at that point you have met your potential. You know, you've gone up, you've taken as far as your skill set was going to allow. And there's always, if you can be humble about it and recognize that there's always somebody more skilled, always somebody that's going to be better at a thing than you are, and you can hand it off when it's time. That what a great compliment to know that it's time. It's time to give it up for somebody
But that's
else
hard, right?
Well,
to
it's an
but
interesting
it's
thing.
really hard.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting thing because you're talking about being a fighter pilot and you're like, I'm the best. I'm the best at this thing. There's nobody better. It's so competitive. But then to have that different mindset of like, hey, I know there's somebody that's going to come. There's going to be a time where I want somebody to take over and do a better job with this thing. It's like, it's bigger than obviously.
Well, I think of like as like
Yeah.
a business. A business
Yeah.
is almost like it's a creation, right? It's your
Yeah.
child, right? It's this thing that you created, that
Mhm.
you've brought into the world, that you built up and spent time with and everything else. And then to say that, you know, just like you were saying with your son, you know, you want to hold your hand, you want to take him out and do things that eventually he's going to be like, Dad, I need to go do this by myself. And it's going to break your heart. It's like
Yeah.
that point where, you know, you're like, this business has grown up and it's like, I don't need you anymore. I need someone else to fill a void. And, you know, that it's kind of like, you know, obviously it's a good thing, just like your son saying, Dad, I don't need to be like holding your hand at, you know, 50 years old. Like that's a good thing. But at the same time, it's going to break your heart when it happens, right?
It's yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's life, right? That's a cycle. Businesses have a life cycle. A 501, nonprofit isn't a business, but I mean, it has a life cycle too, and it's going to mature, it's going to grow. And at some point, I have to be humble enough, like I said, to recognize it's time for someone with a different skill set. And I can tell you that jujitsu has helped me to learn to be more that way than I was before. I've always said I would have been a better fighter pilot if I'd done jujitsu first, because they don't teach you how to handle failure very well in the military.
Hmm.
In jujitsu, you're going to learn how to deal with failure, and you're going to learn to use it as a tool. Um, and I wish I had been able to have that mindset when I was flying fighters, because that is not in the culture. um, in the military, it's very different because the stakes are high, and we know that, we're aware of that all the time. But I think sometimes we miss out on the utility of positively using failure, because we berate ourselves, we beat ourselves up so much when we make mistakes, even in training, because we have to be the best. We have to be. And I think I have a healthier relationship with failure now than I did when I was younger, because of jujitsu uh, and competition and things like that. I think that there's a lot to learn about yourself, and how to use those things as positives then, instead of just negatives and reasons to be upset with yourself.
Yeah, it's hard to do that. It's something I think because we all want to be good at this thing. We want to be good at
Yeah.
jujitsu. You want to be
Yeah.
good at whatever you do, and failure is important. And like I'm one of those people that I constantly will ruminate about stuff. If I don't get it or something doesn't go the way that I want it to go, I'll beat myself up. But being able to kind of get out of that rut and just be like, all right, that's it's part of the process to fail and to struggle a little bit. And I actually want to ask you, what's maybe something that as part of We Defy, besides maybe the funding, that's always an issue, right? But what's another challenge with We Defy that maybe, or a failure that you guys have had that you're able to learn from and kind of build off of and create something better?
I think one thing that we're still trying to figure out how to problem solve this one is, we have over 800 gyms that are involved with us, and every Veterans Day and every Memorial Day, we do a massive nationwide push to raise funds and ask for gyms to have seminars, open mats, and we'll raise $160,000 per campaign. But we're only seeing like 15% of the gyms that are on our roster participating.
Yeah.
That's something we've looked at that every 6 months and said, okay, what do we need to tweak? What do we need to shift or change to get, I mean, to have gyms even just hold an open mat for us? If we could get
Mhm.
30%, that'd be $300,000
Mm.
based on what we typically do. If we could get 50, but we just can't seem to get past, but it's like our volunteers too, you know, I've got a staff of 30 or 40 that give us so much of what they can. But then we've got another 300 that they give us what they can, but they only have so much availability. And the volunteer work is hard
Yeah.
because it's on top of everything else you do. So on the one hand, you know, you wish you could get, it's the same thing with these gyms that we wish we could get them all to participate at the same high level, right? But that's unrealistic. It's just not possible. So we really appreciate the gyms that do go out, and every single time we have an event, they're always there. They're always able to stand up and say, "Hey, we raised $200. Hey, we raised $3,000. Hey, we raised $7,000." So that's a challenge for us. It's like, how do we get everyone participating and everyone is committed, as maybe say that the people that are able to commit the most. If we could do it across the board, we'd be in a totally different place. It's just a challenge. I think with
Mhm.
volunteers too, you know, it's it's really hard to run this thing without a paid staff. So we try to keep the work at bite-sized amounts so that different volunteers, depending on how much time they have to give and how much willingness they have, because they're trying to balance their whole lives. How much can they handle without burning out?
Mhm.
Because we can't have volunteers burning out. We can't put too much on their plates, and we have to let them know how much we appreciate what they're doing for us, because if they don't, this doesn't happen either.
Mhm.
So those are really interesting challenges, because we're not paying anybody to do this, or you know, very few people. So how do you keep them coming back when it's not putting food on the table? I say the gyms, yes, we provide a student or two, but that's not a lot of money. I mean, you know, it's a scholar, it's 1 year of tuition,
Mhm.
you know. So those are challenges for us sometimes. How do we do it better? Like, we're not doing it bad. We're not in bad spots, but what if we could pull it all off, really maximize everybody's participation, not just their willingness, but their capability, their ability to do so as well.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the challenge, right? Like, it's with anything, it's like just a statistic, right? You're gonna have like, when you look at people, like how many people buy books versus read them. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
lots
sure.
of people
Yeah,
buy books, but they don't. A lot of people don't actually open them up and read them. Even like when
yeah,
I sell an instructional video, I can go through and look online, like in the back end of the software, I can be like,
sure.
who actually went through this entire thing? You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah,
because if you go through this entire thing, it's going to make you better. But who did it? And again, it's
yeah,
always like you always run into this like 80-20, like 15-7. You see it over and over again where a smaller group of people are going to do the most, and then the other ones just don't. And it's like it's this perplexing plot. Even like with you, I'm sure, Eugene, because you're a physical therapist. If you could like really get down into it, how many people come to you? They get the exercises. How many people are like hyper like focused and they do all the work and they do all the exercises versus the ones that come do it and then like say thank you and they never do it.
It's
I guarantee that
more,
it would
more.
it would be a similar sort of spread.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and it's like creating. That's the goal, right? How do you get buy-in? How do you create buy-in? Create, I don't know that. I think people want to do something, they want to feel incentivized or feel like they're getting something in return. I think someone like you that is the vice president of you do all this stuff and you get something in return, right? Like, man, look how many you get something. Look how many people I'm helping, right? Like, there's something to it. And I think if people have some sense of, like, we talk about purpose and connection to it, and some sense of like I'm getting something, I think maybe that can help. But
I'm
yeah,
curious,
it's tough.
do you guys do, because I'm sure you probably do you have like again, I'm sometimes very like, as much as I'm on the internet, sometimes I'm not on it, you know what I mean? So I miss a lot of stuff. So if you already do this, be like, just whatever. But I'm curious, do you guys do, and I'm sure you do like spotlights of the different members and these people that have come to you and like the benefits that they've had from it, like basically sharing their story so that like you know, hopefully that the gym owners that are supporting the whole thing, they can actually see kind of like, hey guys, like all you guys running the gyms, you actually made this happen through the organization. Cause you know, they can actually maybe have that like sort of the end of the feedback loop, like, hey, like I did this work and look what I contributed to, that kind of thing.
So yeah, our social media plan includes, you know, recognizing the gyms, recognizing certain ambassadors. We do highlights. If we get testimonials from athletes, we like to put them up there if they're willing to let us use them, their pictures and their words. I think today we had a social media meeting this morning. I was talking to our guy. He was going to announce the top events from our Memorial May campaign, and like which gyms and which regions raise the most money, because that's important to us. I want to highlight those gyms. Like I want them to see their name in lights on our website,
right?
You know, on our Instagram. You know, that's important to me. And as a nonprofit, there's actually like a lot of rules about how you can and can't recognize people, which is a whole other mess of stuff that we have to navigate. So incentivizing is challenging regulatorily sometimes. I can tell you that like a lot of the volunteers, when they do step away, or if they have to take a smaller role than they had, a lot of them, you can tell they feel really disappointed or bad that they can't keep up with what they were doing for whatever reason. And we, as a staff, we always tell them like it's okay. We appreciate everything you're able to do, like, but you are a volunteer. You have to make this work with everything else in your life, and that's different for everybody. And there are times when it works out really, really well, and there's times when it won't. And if you find a time that it'll work out well again, and you still feel that fire to do it, then please come back. Absolutely, we'd love to have you. But I don't ever want anybody to feel bad or feel like they're failing us when they have to say it's time for me to back off, because that's part of life. It's okay. We appreciate and love what you were able to do for us while you were here. There's no expectation that you'll always be able to do it. That's not fair. That's not life. So,
but that goes back to like even talking about, you know, being humble, or, you know, realizing what your role is in that, because, you know, you get a bunch of, you know, type A type people who are gung ho and ready to do this thing. And, you know, it's hard to like, whether the organization gets too big for you or too complex and you're like, you're not the right person, or simply it just doesn't fit, even though you really want to do it. It's just not the right place, right time. It's hard to sometimes let go of something because you physically or, you know, mentally, or just you can't, for whatever reason. It's hard to realize that and hard to accept that.
So I just went through that a couple weeks ago. I've always been really into competing, and I'm 47 years old. I'm brown belt, and I think I've competed in 8 majors. I've podiumed in 5, and I won one of them. I haven't won any of them at brown belt yet, but I've been on the podium at all the majors at brown belt that I've gone to. But I am getting older, and I had some health stuff come up that's not stopping me from doing anything. But when it came up, for the first time, I actually took a step back and took a look at, okay, you're a dad, you're running We Defy's daily operations, or, you know, helping to run it. You're a husband, you have an actual job, you go to the gym to train. You also get really mad when you're in competition mode and you lose a match in training, and you don't get mad at the other person, but you get mad at yourself. You make yourself go to the gym even when it doesn't make sense to go to the gym because of the other requirements in your life. And it just started this cascading of thoughts that made me think, why do I compete? Which I think competing is really important. I'm not saying that it's of no value or anything like that, but for me and where I am right now in jiu-jitsu, I'm taking a look at the rest of my life and being a little older, I said, you know what? It's okay to say I've accomplished my goals in competition, at least for now, because I have. My goal was always get on the podium and show yourself that you're as good as the top people in your bracket, that you get to be in that crew of people. That to me was my goal. It wasn't necessarily to walk away with a gold medal again, or like a world championship again. Like I did that at blue belt, and it's just blue belt. Who cares? But when I took this step back, and because I was getting ready for Masters Worlds again, and I was trying to figure out how am I going to get my training in with the 3 vacations we have in August and all this stuff. And it wasn't anybody else. It was me. It was me that came up with this. I said, it's okay. You don't have anything left to prove to anybody. And really, you've been trying to prove it to yourself.
Yeah.
Nobody else really cares. Nobody else cares.
That's right.
So what if you could go and have fun with jiu-jitsu? And instead of trying to win all the time, which is type A me, you were just trying to learn all the time.
Uh-huh.
I feel good about my type or my A game. I feel good about my competition game, but I have gaps. Maybe I should just go have fun and work on those and require less of myself than I'm always requiring. And when I started to really think about it, I decided I wasn't going to compete anymore. And I don't know that I never will again, but I know that I won't be doing it for a while. I never thought about what it cost to be an active and committed competitor. I always just did it because I was supposed to. And then just recently, I took a step back, looked at the whole field and said, I think it's time. And it came out of the blue, but I'm having more fun right now with jiu-jitsu. I'm teaching at the gym now. I'm trying to fill the gaps more than just work on my A game. I'm studying more than I've ever studied because I have a responsibility now to teach people stuff. So I don't try to teach my A game. I study the stuff I suck at so that I can then teach it because it'll make me better. And then to me, like, I did all the A game stuff I need to get to black belt. We're pretty close. Now I need to fix the other stuff. And I think for me right now, that was the right decision. But man, was it hard. It was really hard to come to that conclusion.
Competition teaches you what it needs to teach you. I think that's the importance of it, right? It teaches you where your gaps are, where your holes are. Also teaches you if you belong, but then also teaches you when it's maybe time to take a different route. So I think it's important.
And I'm not working any less in the gym. I was at wrestling this morning. I lifted before that. I'm going back to the gym to teach tonight. So I'm not taking a step back from the environment. I'm just changing how I do it.
Well, that's even like I had a conversation with he was an Olympic silver medalist in judo named Neil Adams. And we were at this camp that was like judo, horsemanship and stuff, and it was super interesting. But he and I were talking over a campfire, at night, and I was in my early 30s at the time, and I remember like, man, like I think it was 31 maybe. At this point, I was kind of to the point where like I didn't really want to train as hard as I had been because it was breaking me down. And I was like, man, like, basically was training for fun most of the time. And then I would just kind of ramp up periodically when I needed to for competitions and then go back to having fun, right? And go back to learning and things like that. And I remember talking to him and he said that when he retired, he had like the best training years of his life because he just said, I'm done. I'm not competing anymore. He said, I got so much better at judo because I was just learning. I was trying stuff out, I was exploring. And he said, I had so much fun. He said from like 30 to 40, and up, he's like, I had my favorite years of training that I'd ever have because the pressure was off. You know what I mean? And so I think that, everybody at some point, you just get to that point. And again, you're a guy who was a fighter pilot, you competed, eventually you can stop trying to slay dragons and you can just kind of, you can do it and enjoy it, right? Like eventually you can be like, hey man, like the body's done a lot for you. Why don't you just enjoy it for a little bit rather than trying to push yourself to, to win or whatever.
Yeah. I think that's well, in fact, my wrestling coach was on the Olympic team bubble. And he's an amazing dude. And I called him when I came up with this idea too, or when I was trying to muddle through it. And we were talking about it today. I just told him, I feel so much just better. Like I'm not getting mad like I used to get mad. If I get nicked up, I'm not stressing out about it because like, crap, what does this mean for 6 weeks? Is this going to recover in time? It's just like, but I'm still working basically as hard as I was before, just in a different way, in a way that's focused on learning instead of performing. And my whole life has been about performing. and perfection and hitting the goals and not missing and not screwing up. And I just realized, like, I don't have to do that anymore, at least not in the same level that I have. Like, it's okay to take a break. It's cool
Mhm.
to just be. Like, I'm always been a doer, but you think about like mindfulness and, you know, Buddhism and
Yeah.
and that stuff. Just be.
Mhm.
Don't always have to do. Just be. And now I've decided that it's okay to do that.
Mhm.
It's
Well,
not
and
natural for me, but I'm gonna.
well, you might find, I don't know that you will, but for me at least, you might find that if you ever decide to compete again, like you get the itch, because like for me, I compete very sporadically at this point because I'm like,
Mhm.
I've won all these different tournaments. I'm like, what am I going to do? Like win them again and again? It's like I've done what I wanted to win, right? But you might find that like for me, I had my best actual competitions after I didn't really care about competing as much.
Yeah.
Strange as it is, like it was like when I was done trying to compete and I was willing to like, because at one point I was like, I'm done competing, but this is back in 2017. I was like, I'm just done competing. And then towards the end of the year, I competed again, then I had some more competitions or whatever else. But I remember I started getting better and better because it didn't have any sort of hold on me anymore. I didn't care. So like when I
Yeah.
competed, it was like, I'm going to compete and I'm going to try to win, but I literally do not care what happens out there. Like if I lose, like it doesn't matter. My family still loves me. My students are still be there for me, whatever. And I wonder if maybe if you ever do get the itch, if it'll be the same thing where it won't have the same negative effect on your training. You'll train hard because you're already training hard, right? But it'll be like, well, let's see what happens. And then if you get out to the competition, it will have the same effect on your game where you're able to be more open and more aggressive and more creative because again, there's no pressure on it. It's just, let's go see what happens kind of thing. I'm curious.
The head of our affiliation out here, we're at a GF team gym, and the head guy a couple gyms over, I was talking about the same thing because he's always been a big supporter of me like competing, but he's a very great guy and never would force anybody to compete, always just encouraged people. And I
Mhm.
told him all this. He said, he just said what you just said. He said, someday when you can go and not care about the outcome, you should try again. And you'll probably find you'll do even better than you did when you were squeezing the orange so hard.
Mhm.
But you have to be the one to decide it's time for that.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
very zen moment from him.
That's good. And Chewy, that's what you said. You said like, man, when I don't care about the outcome anymore, it's when, you can really
Yeah.
just have fun and go out there and do your thing. And that's hard. That's a hard place to get to as well. But that's like after I think you're comfortable with yourself and kind of what you've accomplished and what you've done.
Well, and even taking a step back, like you're doing right now, where you take
Yeah.
because I mean, for me, I started competing in 2000, and then I didn't take a break for any real discernible time period until 2017 was the first time I had like a break for almost a year. And it was kind of like like I'm still here. I'm still, my students still want to train with me, and my girlfriend, my wife still wants to be with me. Like, nothing changes. This
Yeah.
is completely a me thing. And so then it started this shift where it was like, instead of this identity of as I am a competitor, it was like, I compete sometimes. And when it has no hold on me, it was like, whatever. Like, I don't really care. And I know I'm good and I'll go do these competitions. And again, it was a different thing. But again, it's a breaking away from like these identities and these stories that we sort of give ourselves that sometimes they get deeply rooted and we get really attached to them, and you got to kind of disconnect from them a little bit to get control of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's a journey, right? And it's about development and reinventing yourself sometimes, being somebody a more complete person in a way,
Mm.
Um, well, I just starting to get into teaching, like, but I mean, the Air Force taught me how to teach people to fly airplanes. So like in general, I understand, I have a process, right, of how I teach people stuff and they do stuff. So one of the things that I think is really important is to teach um, or roll with what we were studying and do
Yeah.
positional work. Like,
Hmm.
because there's plenty of classes where you just, okay, time to roll. We're going to throw 5 minutes clock. Everybody go roll. But
Hmm.
especially when you do that, people are going to default right back to their A games. They're only
Hmm.
going to do the stuff they always do. So if you put them in positional roles, even in the beginning of class, a lot of times what I'll do it is okay, here's what we're going to study today. I always start with an objective. So when everybody's lined up, say, today, this is what we're doing. And here's what I want you to get out of today.
Hmm.
Here's 2 or 3 objectives that I want you to have. It's a very military model of teaching. And the very first thing after we do some warm-ups that I have them do is I put them in the positions that they're going to play with, and I just say go, and I don't instruct anything. And we'll get brand new people that just don't. And this sort of mirrors, I think, I haven't looked into it too much, but a little bit of the ecological approach that a lot of people are talking about, to an extent, where you have here's an objective, go do it. And then that's all I know about the ecological thing. I haven't looked at it into it. I don't understand. I haven't thought about it a lot, but I use that as a tool, because then the rest of, maybe the next 30% of class is, okay, here's how I think, here's a way to accomplish the thing that you were trying to accomplish. And we're only going to, there's going to be 14 million ways. Here's one that we're, especially with essentials, here's one, this is how we're going to try to do it. And you teach that. And maybe you teach a couple other things, but then at the end of the class, you say, okay, now try again. Same partners. And now that you've given them a little bit of a guide, they said, here's my frustration. Here's the barriers I'm having. You answer some questions too. Here's a path. Now try the path. And to me, that's a really, in my brain at least, that's a really effective way to at least teach essentials classes, because there's so much stuff for people to learn. And you can get so bogged down in like, okay, here's how you set up a triangle and take a half an hour. People just, especially new people, aren't necessarily going to get that. But I think if you really focus on the basic positions and concepts that they can then practice, to me, that makes a lot of sense. So in my first little bit of learning how to teach jiu-jitsu here, that's kind of been the focus, and that's been the way I've been approaching it, at least in the essentials classes.
Very cool.
Yeah. In something that you touched on that, like, I think is really important is, like, if you really want to get people to learn, you get them into a position, and like you said, you give them an objective, get them into it, get their hands dirty, and basically make them fail a little bit, because they're going to get frustrated, or not frustrated, but they're going to mess up and be like, I can't get this. How do I make this happen? But I always think of that as plowing the field, so you can plant the seed, right? Because if I can make you receptive to it, because now you have a need for this thing, then when I actually give you the information, it makes way more sense, opposed to I'm going to teach you this stuff and it has no significance to you. And then whatever, so I think it's a smart thing, and 100% the situational rolling is super, super important.
It's huge.
And, and identifying just clear objectives and stuff like that for people. But yeah, I think it's smart. So, yeah.
TJ, I was going to ask you, man, if just real quick, if people want to get involved in We Defy, like if they want to find out what you guys are about, learn more about the mission, any of that stuff, where can they reach out to, and then kind of where can they reach out to you as well if there's something, a connection you can make with them?
The best way to do it is go on the We Defy Foundation website, which is wedefyfoundation.org. And if you email us there through one of the links, the email address is also info@wedefyfoundation.org. And those emails come to a couple of us, but I'm on the distro list for that. So if you want to get a hold of me, that's a way to do it. If you go through Instagram to our account, or Facebook, it goes to our social media folks, and they route messages to those of us that are the intended recipients as well. I have my own Instagram. It's Blitz at We Defy, that I do my We Defy related stuff too. So you can also hit me up on Instagram there. So those are probably the best ways.
Cool. Awesome, man. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service and what you guys are doing. I mean, we get guys, military men and women all the time that come drop by the gym, and it's awesome to share mats with them. They're good people, and it's fun. It's fun to have that connection with them as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very special community. I mean, jiu-jitsu community itself, and then the military piece of it. It has impacted my life in ways that I had no idea, no clue that was ever going to happen. Well, when I first said, okay, I'll try jiu-jitsu.
It's probably one of the best decisions you made, I'm sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of us that have been training for at least a little while, I think they can say that. Wish they started sooner, and one of the best decisions they made. Yeah. So, yep. Well, awesome, brother.
TJ, it was good chatting with you, bro, and thank you for being here. All right, guys. Thanks for being on the podcast with us. Hopefully you enjoyed that episode with TJ. I mentioned a book in the podcast about a fighter pilot named Robin Olds. Any of you, aviation people, you already know this guy, but it's a fun book. Even if you're not maybe necessarily the biggest, war buff kind of person, there's still a human experience about it. Like, the book is titled Fighter Pilot, and it's a fun read. And it's not terribly long, but and you can get it on Audible if you want. There's like there's a good Audible version of it. But again, it's crazy because you read about this guy who, again, he has like 6 weeks of training, and like to get into like they put him in a fighter plane. I think it was like the P-38, and then they throw him over the English Channel fighting Germans. Like after it's like 6 or 8 weeks or something. Like, could you imagine like 2 months or something, and then you just signed up, boom, you're out there.
Off you go.
Like that's crazy, because they're getting him out there. And then again, he ended up being a triple ace, and some crazy stories in Vietnam and all this other stuff. And then but there's a very human experience, and I actually cried a little bit. Not like I didn't bawl or anything, but there was a moment of teary-eyed, sort of like, damn, that one got me at the last chapter. Where again, because if you read this book, you're going on this guy's life journey with him, right? And then at the very end, he's basically just sort of coming to grips with his mortality and just staring off and explaining it. And he's writing about it, and it's like, damn, it's something that we'll all have to experience, and especially for those of us that have been athletes in some fashion, you are going to come to that moment. And it's like you just know, and you're like, damn it, like that. It was a really good book. So enjoyed it. Definitely worth a read or a listen, depending on how you like to consume your books. Also, big shout out to our Patreon members. We'll go through a couple, about 5 of them right here. We'll just start doing this periodically. But thanks to Brad, MJ, Carlos, Darren, Austin, and Jiu-Jitsu, amongst others. I'll start doing these periodically. But thank you guys for being patron members and supporting the podcast. Again, that's one of the reasons why we are able to do this and continue to do it. So we appreciate you guys for doing it. And big thanks to you guys. And also, if you guys want to become a Patreon member, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. When you join up, you'll get access to the library of content that we have there. You'll get some perks and things like that. Amongst other things, we'll be tweaking it for periodically here and there. But again, if you guys want to support the podcast, do it at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Also, if you guys want to check out our sponsors, Charlotte's Web CBD, charlottesweb.com is the website. Again, premier CBD company out there. I mean, they make a fantastic product. It's third-party tested to ensure what's in the bottle or what's in the gummy or what's in the whatever it is what's in there, so you can actually make sure that that's what you're actually getting when you take a supplement, which I think super important. If you're going to put something into your body, it's good to know that what's in there instead of getting some like crazy stuff from a gas station or something. But again, charlottesweb.com is the website. Chewjitsu 30 for 30% off the order is a way to save some money when you go to checkout. If you guys want to get some new jiu-jitsu gear, if you're getting the itch to buy some new stuff, random sort of thought with this. If you ever hit like a little stagnant point, getting a little like, training's not as fun. Something I always do, and I find it fun, is I'll buy new stuff. Like, I didn't actually buy it, but remember when we were at the ADCCs a couple of years ago, the new kimono guys. Future Kimono. They gave me some stuff because they're like, man, we're about to load this truck up. You want anything? And I'm like, oh, sure. So I was like, give me the American flag stuff, America. And so they give me, and I was so pumped because it definitely felt different. It was a different feel of stuff. I'm like, I want to try this stuff out. And same thing with Matt. Like Matt sent me some prototypes that I'm trying out for the next batch of jiu-jitsu gear. And as soon as I got it, I was like, oh man, I want to go train. There's something about having, a new suit of armor, a new costume to wear that you're just like, I want to go put this stuff. Even if like, if you ever buy something like a nice shirt, what do you want to do? You want to go on a date? You're like, I want to go, hey, let's go to dinner or something. So you can wear your nice clothing. Right. So that's something I do to this day where if if I just need to like shake it up a little bit and I just want to give something new, I'll go buy a new rash guard, new gi, new something. And it gets me excited to train. And so again, if you want to do the same for yourself, or if you just want some jiu-jitsu gear, go to epicrollbjj.com. That's the website, and the promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. And guys, if you would like to join my Chew Crew email list, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up, you'll get access to my exclusive email that comes out every single day, Monday through Friday, sometimes on the weekends, just depends. And in that email, it basically, just like the podcast does, it just spans the gamut as far as what I'll talk about, everything from book recommendations, dieting ideas that work for me personally, things I do for cardio, or it could be even, training related stuff jiu-jitsu technical ideas, free resources, discounts that I have for my products, a lot of different stuff. Basically, anything and everything that I think can possibly be helpful to someone, whether it's a mindset, whether it's an actual specific training idea, I include in that email. So you get access to that plus some free gifts when you join up. And so, guys, with that said, thank you so much for joining us this week, as always. Hopefully you enjoyed the podcast with TJ, and we'll talk to you next time.